Hey guys, welcome to a new movie review. Today I'm going to be talking about the new Clint Eastwood film Richard Jewell, which is based on a true story, based off the 1996 Atlanta Olympic bombing, which was a real event at the time and is still, a part of history, and a situation that very much got blown out of proportion when the wrong kind of story got out of hand. But this film is written and directed and produced by Clint Eastwood, the very iconic Clint Eastwood of The Good, the Bad, the Ugly fame, who obviously is a huge director and actor and producer and all the big stuff in Hollywood, right? So in Richard Jewell, a security guard who's strong-willed, is kind of beloved by many. An innocent, loving man who works as security guard. Basically, trained his whole life for it. Befriends a lawyer who's played by Sam Rockwell at one of his previous jobs, and basically gets better and better security work over the years. He eventually lands a job at the stadium where the 1996 Atlanta stadium was that held the Olympics for that year, the Summer Olympics, and Richard Jewell basically finds a bag full of pipe bombs at this opening ceremony of the event. He clears people out of the way. He becomes a hero of the situation. Um, he gets all over the place in the news, and people want to write books with him about the scenario and things like that. But things get completely blown out of proportion, very, very much so, when a journalist decides that she strongly believes that Richard himself might be the bomber of the situation since they haven't found the bomber yet. And he has kind of an unusual background. He got fired from jobs for weird reasons. He wasn't paying his taxes on certain years. Um, he has guns in his home because he likes to hunt during hunting season. So there's all these things that can mislead people who read, the press or people who run the press to kind of make this story out to look like Richard Jewell himself was the bomber of the scenario, and maybe he was down this bad part in life and wanted to make himself look like the hero for the situation to kind of improve his life and things like that. So this journalist really tries to push this story and really make people believe that Richard was not the hero of the situation, that he really was this bomber. Um, and so essentially, this ruins Richard's life. He's constantly being pressured by the press to answer questions, and the FBI is trying to set him up to make it look like he really did do this horrible thing when they're just kind of gathering evidence and gathering things that could make it look like Richard really committed this really bad thing. So throughout the course of this film, Richard Jewell has to prove his innocence. He is a friend with a lawyer who he befriends at the beginning of the movie, and it's somebody that he became friends with at a previous job of his, which helps him out in this scenario. That's really what this film is about, is kind of the long-term toxic press heat that Richard got from this event, and how he had to really prove his innocence, that he really was the hero all along, that the celebration that they had for him is the thing that he very much wanted to celebrate for the rest of his life, because he is gone now. He passed away already. I think he passed away in the early 2000s, I want to say. And that's really what the film Richard Jewell is about, is the life of Richard Jewell, kind of how he was a hero of a situation, but had a huge tragedy later on during this scenario and had to deal with that, and how he had to kind of prove his innocence at a time where everybody thought he was this horrible bomber of this horrible event. So this film, you guys, Richard Jewell, I loved this movie. I've been a Clint Eastwood fan for a good chunk of my life. I love The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, the Dirty Harry films, Unforgiven, Gran Torino. There's so many great films that I can't even think of all of them off the top of my head that Clint Eastwood's worked on over the years as both actor and director, and I loved Gran Torino. I think this is probably my favorite Clint Eastwood film since Gran Torino. Probably not my all-time favorite, because I think Unforgiven and The Good and the Bad, the Ugly will kind of always be his best work he's ever done. That's kind of his most iconic work, both as an actor and a director. Um, but Richard Jewell is probably the most happiest I've felt with a Clint Eastwood film since Gran Torino. I've enjoyed some films post Gran Torino, like I liked The Mule, and American Sniper was all right and things like that. But I really, really like this movie. I can't remember the last time I was this happy with a Clint Eastwood film, and like I said, it probably has been since Gran Torino. I thought this film was just masterfully crafted, masterfully directed, masterfully performed by the actors and actresses who were in the film. It really did show the heroic and tragic parts of Richard Jewell's life in this scenario that he had to deal with. And when it was going bad, how the press was just on him all the time. He had constant surveillance by them 24/7, had to answer questions, had to get rid of journalists out of his car and things like that. It just got really out of hand, and the film really depicts just how horrible it was and how he had to really kind of prove his innocence amongst all of this and things like that. So I thought this film was masterfully made, and I absolutely love this film. It really does show that Richard Jewell really was the hero of this scenario, and that this horrible press thing that happened to him really should have never happened at all. But for my positives and negatives of Richard Jewell and why I love this film so much, this is a very energetic film from Clint Eastwood to start off with. Clint Eastwood hasn't necessarily made another energetic film in a while, but I feel like this is his most energetic film in a long time. It's not overly washed out with whites and grays. He really does try to make this feel like we're watching this event play out while it really happened, and he tries to make it feel like 1996 and things like that. So it's a very energetic film. It's definitely on its feet all the time, getting us involved, getting us wrapped up in what Richard Jewell had to encounter with all this in the press and everything. So I loved how energetic Clint Eastwood made this film. This film is also masterfully depicts the heroic and tragic parts of Richard Jewell's life. It really does show all the good stuff he went through, all the bad stuff he went through, just how walking his dog in the middle of the night became difficult because journalists were always on him and always asking him questions and trying to pick up the pieces any way they could of potential clue that he might have been the bomber of the scenario and things like that. So this film masterfully shows every heroic part of this journey he had and every tragic part of journey that he had here. I thought it was just masterfully written and directed and performed by the cast and crew of this film. It's just masterfully made. Huge thumbs up to Clint Eastwood for making such a great film here. This film made me feel happy and sad and heartbroken and inspired all at the same time, and I think that really goes to show just how well written and well directed the film is. I felt happy when Richard got his good moments in the spotlight. I felt sad when I knew deep down that he did not plant this bomb, that the press is just on him all the time, and it's just heartbreaking to see his mother have to deal with this too, and just how he's probably not going to land another job again because of this scenario and things like that. And I just felt inspired too, because it really does go to show to stand up for what you believe in, what you are. Richard obviously was this very dedicated security guard, would do anything to basically make sure everybody was safe during a dangerous situation like this. That he was willing to risk his own life to make sure of this too. So it's a very inspiring film in that sense, even with all the sad stuff we have to get through in this movie and all the heartbreaking stuff. It also was a very inspiring film by the end of the day too, that really makes you think about all the things that Richard probably went through while this whole event happened. And I also like how this film really encourages you to think how what you might do if you were Richard, how if you're a lawyer who's played by Sam Rockwell in this film, and beautifully too. I think it's one of the best supporting roles of the year easily. This film really encourages you to think of what you might have done in this scenario if you were Richard, and Clint Eastwood kind of invites you to think this way. Even by the end credits, I was thinking about what I would have done as Richard, and just how scary it would have been, and how scary it would have been to just walk outside and have to deal with the press all the time, and deal with things that simply weren't true, and deal with things that deep down you didn't do. So I like how this film really encourages you to kind of make you think as to how you might have handled the situation too if you were Richard, and what you might have done differently or the same or all that stuff. The film also depicts the toxic and hurtful nature of journalism, how words that are really hateful and mean to somebody can kind of ruin your life if it's the right kind of press, and really kind of make people believe that you're this horrible person that the press is trying to make you out to be, and just how toxic that can be. So I really liked how the film shows the toxic nature of journalism sometimes, and how hateful things and hateful words can really hurt somebody in the long term. And if you're not careful with what you post in these things, that person might not have a normal life ever again. And so that can be a very hurtful, damaging thing to somebody. And so the film depicts this very well. The performances in this film are all top notch. Sam Rockwell easily has to win Best Supporting Actor for this movie. He was funny and dramatic and supportive. You loved all the friendly things he would do for Richard, what he would do through Richard, even if it was tough or he had to deal with journalists himself and things like that. And Kathy Bates gives a very heartbreaking speech in one scene, and just throughout the whole movie, it's just very heartbreaking to see her have to go through all this and how the FBI raided her home and took all her stuff and took anything that might have been evidence that Richard committed this horrible thing. And just all the performances all around were very strong. Sam Rockwell in particular, he just has to win the Oscar. It just was a very, very strong performance, and I loved what he did with his role. For my negatives of Richard Jewell, it is a little slow in some moments. There's a scene involving a family discussion that does go on for a little too long. There's other scenes like this where it's just a little too slow for its own good. For the most part, this film is probably my favorite pacing in a Clint Eastwood film, but there are some slower moments that could have benefited from some better editing and some better trimming in its clips. There's also some repetitive moments here too. I think after a while it just kind of beats you over the head of, Richard was innocent and now this is going on and the journalists are doing this again and Sam Rockwell has to deal with this again and now the journalist has to deal with this again. So there's certain moments where it just got a little too repetitive and probably could have adventured into things that the film didn't adventure into that I would have been curious about as to how Richard Jewell got through this scenario and things like that. John Hamm plays a character in this film that you're really not supposed to like, but Olivia Wilde plays a role like this too in the movie. And there's something that happens that I can't spoil here that kind of redeems her character a little bit regarding Olivia Wilde's character, but John Hamm's character is just completely unredeemable in this movie. And I know they're trying to depict probably the way that this FBI agent was during this case in real life, but Olivia Wilde at least had kind of her redeeming moment near the end of the movie, but John Hamm is just. And obviously, he has to play this because it's just this really horrible person that this was based on and stuff. He just was very unredeemable in the movie. Even by the end of the movie, that it was clear that Richard did not commit this horrible thing. He's just completely unredeemable, and I don't know. If they could clear Olivia Wilde a little bit at the end of the movie, I thought they could have done something the same with John Hamm, but I just hated that guy. The moment I looked at him, he played a really mean guy that you do not like at all in this movie. So I guess cheers to him if he was supposed to do that. But man, what an unredeemable character! It's really bothered me throughout the whole movie is just how unredeemable John Hamm's character was in this movie. I thought more details could have been shown during the end credits as to John Hamm getting in trouble and this sexual case that he got involved with and things like that, and how the last years of Richard Jewell before he passed away. I thought they could have dived into that a little bit more and kind of what happened to the mom after all this and the stepdad after all this and things like that. I thought all that could have been explored a little bit more at the end of the movie. It's a very brief kind of explanation as to kind of the post events of this event that I thought they could have gotten more detail on before the end credits start rolling. Overall, I'm going to give Richard Jewell a 9 out of 10. This is a wonderful movie, easily one of my favorite films of 2019, if not the best one. I still have a couple of other films I got to see before I can claim this film to be the best one. But at the moment, it's my favorite film of 2019. It's just absolutely wonderful. Every emotion was felt in this movie. A couple of small things that wear it down a little bit, but I absolutely love this movie. A great Clint Eastwood movie. Be sure to see this one. I highly recommend Richard Jewell.